Hey everybody, my name's Alex, and this is Bento Radio. Now before we get started, you should know that this is going to be a slightly different episode because of breaking things that happened in anime this week. If you've been paying attention, you might know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, welcome, and you'll find out in a minute. But first, I just want to get through just the opening stuff. So if you really like this podcast or this YouTube channel, because I'm on both, you can subscribe wherever you're listening or watching me right now, to me or me right now. You can subscribe to the podcast in any podcast player that is your favorite and that you can hear me in, and you'll get new episodes every Thursday. The same is true on YouTube. You can scroll down, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell and that like button if you really love the show, because it obviously helps, but the notification bell will let you know, or should let you know, when new episodes drop. But in case you're wondering, they usually drop every Thursday around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you absolutely can't get enough of what my deal is, you can go check out the show's website, which is bento-box.ghost.io. I write stuff occasionally about anime. I do little individual posts for almost all of the episodes that are up here or on the podcast. The only episode that's missing right now is Hajime no Ippo, which was the last episode. If you haven't seen it, the reason why that's missing is because I put that out on Thanksgiving. And I just didn't have it in me after Thanksgiving to do that post, but I will rectify that probably once you see this or listen to this, so definitely go check that out if you are supremely interested. Normally here is where I would throw to which is a combination of 11 Labs and VTuber software that I use to create a character that gives really concise plot synopsises that I actually write at this point, but that's not going to be the case today. I'm not actually going to do any breaks in this video at all, because something not unique to anime, but new to anime happened this past weekend. If you missed it, although I can't really figure out how you could, if you found this podcast and you don't know what's going on, sound off in the comments. But there was a AI dub released for a bunch of shows, I think originally over on Amazon Prime. And then those dubs were also on Crunchyroll later. Or at the same time, I'm not quite sure. And the shows that they picked to attempt to AI dub and the quality of it were insane. Quite frankly, insane. And they were insane for a bunch of reasons. But and I've debated how to talk about AI and how honest I want to be with you, the audience, and decided I want to be really honest with you and let you know that I, like a lot of you may, and like a lot of people do, use AI in my life, both personally and professionally. Largely professionally, actually. And in terms of personal stuff, a lot of what I do is purely ideation through AI, of bumping my way through my own creative process. I'm not putting art out into the world that I'm proposing is mine using AI. I'm just not doing that. I went to art school. I have a fine art degree in design. I'm not who those tools are for. And I'm also not interested in engaging with that. And you can see that I have talked to artists on this very show, and Phil Tomato in particular, I talked to about the AI question, and he was really concise with it and really intelligent about it. And the way I've come to feel about the AI tools is they're exactly that, tools. The intention behind how you use those tools is important. The intention, but in addition to the intention behind how you use those tools being important, the intention of the people making them to understand how they were going to be used is also important. Because And this all comes out of tech and Silicon Valley, and in both of those places, tech as an industry, but Silicon Valley as a hub for tech, have had the mantra of move fast and break things. Only the big problem there is, oftentimes the things they're breaking are not things that they are intrinsically interested in surviving. A perfect example of this is, I promise there's a point to this, a perfect example of this is Uber. Uber broke the entire taxi cab and hired car industry. Now when you go to an airport, you get an Uber. When you come back from the airport, you get an Uber. Oftentimes in cities, you don't get taxis, or if you do, you get them through an app. When I'm in New York City, I'm pretty specific about if I do or don't call an Uber, because that is a city that is built with great public transportation, including the taxi cabs, all the taxi cabs available. And if I can grab a taxi and I'm not in a rush, I will absolutely 100% do that. Because I don't think that, it's supplant people, and technology should be a way for the very top of any pyramid of industry to reduce the amount of money it has to spend on the bottom portions of the pyramid. And in that vein, along with a lot of other salvos having to do with AI and AI tools in specific, is an attempt to do just that. It's an attempt to not pay specifically the voice actors, but also sound engineers and script writers and localizers, a whole host of people who help anime be localized really well and dubbed really well into any native language. Because I saw later that this was also done with the Portuguese dubs, which is insane. Make something that feels just as good in English as it does in Japanese. And sometimes better. A perfect example is if you few shows that are considered to be better as the English dub because the subject matter lends it to it, or the way that the English language performs itself makes it easier for you to get the point across. So, for a perfect example, the English language dub for Cowboy Bebop is considered to be one of the best, and it's considered to be one of the best because everybody really gave an all-star performance, from Blum, from Bo Billingsley, from Christina V. All gave really great performances. And then you look at something like Yu Yu Hakusho, where that dub has so much more attitude and feels so much more like a bunch of delinquents saving the world because they went for it. And they had permission to go for it. And a lot of things went right for that to happen. I'm not going to play any of it here because I don't want to give it eyeballs necessarily, but you can go find, and I encourage you not to watch it on any reputable streaming anything. Don't give these things the time of day. But you can go find compilations specifically of the Banana Fish dub, which is, we'll get to why that's insane in a second. It has none of that. It had no finesse or awareness or emotionality to the lines, and the lines come out clunky, and they come out awkward, and they're around, and the lines are tiptoeing around things, but whole portions of the story of that show, a really wide berth, and I'll get to why that is in a second. And it has to do with why it's insane. The Banana Fish was one of the things they tried to do this with. All that stuff is missing from these things. But the bottom line is that they made a product, and that product could have been for internal use, or it could have been for public consumption. We'll never really know. They came out and they said that no one was supposed to see this. This was supposed to be for internal use only. But even if, why was it AI localized? Why was it AI scripted? You should be paying somebody, even at the internal level, to do that stuff. Because they will apply a humanity and apply a polish, even if only slight, that will carry through this final product. You were working with this as a VO director and a voice actor, this would be a much harder thing to work with than if they had somebody to localize it, write a proper script, and give them the a rough read from somebody even in the mailroom. This just isn't barely professional. And I say that as somebody who knows work, and if you don't know anything about animation, traditionally when you and anime is different than this, but not that different. Traditionally, when you're doing an animation, say a traditional Western animated feature like The Lion King, you want the music and the vocal work to be as close to when you're doing the actual animation as possible. Because what you're doing as an animator is you're lining up the timing of your drawings to work with the actual soundtrack, meaning the beats of the speech, the beats of the music, all of these other things. Part of the reason why openings oftentimes feel really fluid and fun and cool is because they are, in a way, the most pure version of animation in anime, if that makes any sense. They are the closest thing you could probably liken them to is something called an anijam, which is when a whole bunch of animators on doing individual very short cuts of a final product. I've done this before. It's tons of fun because you just kind of this stack of finished drawings along the chain, and you don't know what you're going to get before you. You're not quite sure what you're going to give to the person after you, but fun and creativity is in figuring that out. And so to with any part of animation, anime or otherwise, you gotta be really careful, especially if it's gonna be the soundtrack. If you've ever seen the old Godzilla movies, it's become a running joke that the dubbing doesn't fit. And eventually, when they went to dub more Godzilla movies, that became part of the vibe of Godzilla for a while. And that's how they've okay. But if you look at something any Netflix thing that's dubbed into English, that's from a different country, it feels a little weird to watch, right? That's because what your brain is expecting to happen and what's actually happening don't quite match. And that breaks the immersion immediately. You watch the Banana Fish dub, any clips or compilations of the Banana Fish dub, you'll see that in the dub. It's insane. And the other reason why it's really crazy that they chose specifically Banana Fish to do this with, because if you remember a little while ago, the scandal where they released AI subtitles on a show at Crunchyroll. But the thing about that show was it wasn't an top-rated show. It was something where the fans of it noticed, and then they picked up on it, spread it around, and then it blew up. But there's a real possibility that it wasn't one of their top billing shows. It was something much smaller and could have just gone by the wayside. Now, we're all thankful it didn't, because that gave us a chance to a hammer of punishment in the form of any kind of fan backlash, which is short of mass exodus of subscription fees, the only thing we really have to people understand that it's not okay. But there are a couple other consequences that could happen. You can happening, which I'll get to at the end of the video, but stick around for that. That happened, it was just and it was a low-profile show that wasn't a prestige show, that wasn't a big show, that wasn't not a show with a huge following. The difference here is it's Banana Fish. Banana Fish is a prestige project, and it's from a really well-known, really highly after manga, and it's written like a prestige show. It's written like a prestige, not even like a prestige anime, but a prestige piece of television. The most insane thing is, as somebody who, I said at the very beginning of this, who's worked with AI tools before, I know what these things can do and what they can't do. I've spent a lot of time pushing buttons, pulling levers, seeing what happens. The storyline of Banana Fish is fundamentally about, it has some fundamental things that are about abuse, about specifically behavior with children, all kinds of things that exist in the world and things that can be storylines, but things that aren't kosher, things that aren't PC, so to speak. And if you ever used any of these tools long enough, you will eventually run into their guardrails. Sora, the AI video generating app that just makes literal AI slop 24/7 no matter what you do, is flooded with videos that are essentially railing against Sora and OpenAI, he and Sora and Dolly's company, essentially. They full of videos railing against Sora's guardrails and the fact that they're too restrictive and the fact that they're too hard to work within and too hard to be creative in. And really what that means is that, want to be able to make famous people and historical figures say just the worst things they can figure out on camera. That's just what it means. Or they want to be able to, themselves in a picture kissing Gojo or whatever. Not my concern with these tools. My concern with these tools is that they are restrictive enough, that the human creative process isn't restrictive. A restrictive human creative process, in the same way that the guardrails on all social media, on all of the public-facing AI tools, or the majority of them, is so restrictive that you have to tiptoe around it. So I'll give you a perfect example. Let's say I write in a prompt to T specifically, because Midjourney is a little bit more art and using this for ideation, we're going to try and stay out of your way a little bit more. And Grok is insane in an opposite direction. But if you're typing in a prompt for an image in ChatGPT, if you type something about criminality, it may not do it for you. It just may be I can't. If you type in something and you use the word young in reference to a human being, even if it says young adults, it may not do it. And my point there isn't that I want to generate something like this from ChatGPT, but my point is that ChatGPT can't generate this. It just can't. It's not possible. And obviously, this exists, and that means that this was drawn by a person at some point. And there are certainly more permissive tools out there that you can use. I'm aware of them, I've seen them, but baseline tools just won't do it. And the reason why I'm saying that is important here is because that's clearly the kinds of tools they used to attempt to do this work. And in a story in a very focused storyline like Banana Fish, that's not going to work for a whole host of reasons. And so sidestepping those storylines, even in the clips I've seen, is beyond the pale. It's not okay. And not just because it's AI, but because the AI can't, because it's been prevented from doing so, approach those storylines. A lot of why people like anime is that animation is not as chained to being either super adult, say American Dad or or even something more insane like Stripperella or Fitz the Cat, or being super for kids like Tom and Jerry or Looney Tunes or something like that. It can have those qualities. JoJo's has some real Looney Tunes moments, but for the most part, it is this blend of everything that feels much more true to life than much what's animated in the Western tradition. Even modern shows that are inspired by anime still have a little bit of a child bend to them. If you look at something like Adventure Time is a great show. I love that show. But if you hold Adventure Time up to a lot of fantasy anime in the same vein, the fantasy anime still comes out looking more advanced and more interesting than Adventure Time, because Adventure Time is partially just not interested in that, but it also still aiming squarely at kids on some level. And I can go into all insane lore of Adventure Time and all that stuff, but the thing on the page, so to speak, is still oriented at, like, late elementary school to late middle school age kids. And there's nothing wrong with that. There are tons of anime that most people don't see that's just like for little kids. But the thing is that there's also tons of shows that are specifically for adults, and it is a cultural force in a way that American animation doesn't necessarily get to be right now. And to try and bring any kind of tools that have guardrails that say, no, you can't use this to talk about these scenes, no, you can't use this to do this or the other thing, or it won't say the word or this word or that word, that's a problem. You know, real people curse. Real people call each other slurs. Real people do all of these things. These tools are tuned very specifically to be as broad-reaching as possible and be as unoffensive as possible. One of the things, and I've talked about this before in the podcast I did about it, but one of the things that's really interesting about Just Reincarnation is lots of people hate that show because they hate the main character, because they feel like personally and deeply offended by Rudy as like a person. They think he's a bad person. What the show's trying to tell couldn't be told without doing the stuff it does in the beginning. And making Rudy kind of objectionable weirdo creep on some level. It wants to be about moving on from a bad life, and moving on from a bad life in which you were damaged and did bad things. It can't do that without making you feel like the main character was a scumbag at some point. And then if you're open to interpretation and open to the kind of what the story's doing, you have the media literacy to understand it, you go to see that, like, he didn't become that scumbag by himself. He got there because of a whole bunch of things. And yes, he wasn't necessarily the strongest person, but that's life. That's what actual people are like. The goal of that story is not to make somebody who is Goku. The goal of that story is to make somebody who is Gon Freaks. If that makes sense. Who is, not Gon Freaks, but Freaks. Somebody who is intensely damaged and who is affected by the world around them, and who there's a kind of going backness to Rudy that is understandably grating to people, but like the rest of the story depends on it a little. And I've listened to the entirety of the novel, so like I know where that story goes in its entirety. But my point is that you can't use these tools for this. So why are they? And I started to say it in the beginning. They want to kind of out a lot of the creative work because they don't want to spend their time or their money there, and they want to see if they can't cut corners to save money. At this point, and this episode is going to be kind of long, it's going to be, but at this point I want to talk about some of what could happen, and some of why I think, from a totally like insider perspective, why we got an apology out of specifically. And that is, there's consequences. And there aren't many consequences left for a lot of these companies, and a lot of where you see companies rolling out AI in force, you see them kind of measuring whether or not the consequences are worth it and coming up with the fact that, yeah, I think it's worth it to shave a penny off so we don't have to pay like to make doodads anymore, because we can have a computer make doodads that are, yeah, but you're not paying Bob anymore, so that's a win. The consequences that could happen from this, and the reason why we probably got a have to do with primarily SAG-AFTRA. I have the suspicion that as a operation, is not running a union shop, if that makes any sense. they're not running a shop that has agreed to the terms and conditions of SAG-AFTRA, which is the of the Screen Actors Guild, SAG, that represents voice actors in things like anime, animation, and video games. It actually used to know somebody who was a video game voice actress. She was in Death Auto, actually, and she was a member of SAG-AFTRA. And if you've ever, like, that voice actors have alternative identities, the reason why that is because they want to because they may need to take a job or two outside of SAG-AFTRA, and they're like, wishes at what they call a non-union shop, which is shops that are run specifically without the intervention of the Screen Actors Guild Union or SAG-AFTRA. And Amazon doing this, Amazon pulling this, I'm sure triggers both SAG and SAG-AFTRA and, like, Writers Guild of America and the Screenwriters Guild and, like, all of these unions to be like, that, no. Because that is explicitly cutting out their members the union is there to protect from potential work. Doing this, they didn't pay at the very least, they didn't pay a scriptwriter. At the very least, they didn't pay a localizer. That's a lost job. That's why the unions exist, and that's why the unions are important, even if some unions can be absolute pains in the ass to have around, is that they protect the craft people who are working and who are making the things we enjoy. And the last time, Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild of America and, like, the entirety of Hollywood went on strike, it was about this very thing. It was about, the potential for AI in the writing process and the potential for AI in the creating process, and everybody in all of these, at the tops of all of the unions being worried, rightfully so, that studios would try and cut actors and scriptwriters and all of these people out of the process. And lo and behold, there was, I think a couple weeks ago, there was something around about an agency signing the first AI actress. That's insane. Just no. Nope. Not allowed. I'm sure that triggered some absolute madness from SAG. As this probably has too, because, once again, by even doing this as like a thing for internal use only, there's somebody who would have done that first pass. There's somebody who would have sat there and localized it for the first pass. And then it would go to a scriptwriter who would take that and kind of into a script. And then it would go to the VO director who would, casting and say, well, I need this. And it would find a voice actor who would do what actors do best, which is become that character. And the voice actor would bring things to the script that weren't there after reading the manga and living with the character and figuring out exactly the intonation and how to read things. Hilariously, Lee, the guy who plays Jinwoo in Leveling, people really went after him for the way he says "arise," and he this hilarious video that he's like, "It was my choice. You love the show. Back off, or else next time you hear I record something for the show, it won't be arise. It'll be get up, buddy." And it shows that he's making choices, that he's confident in his choices. None of that is happening when you get something like an AI dub. There's a certain portion of that isn't even happening when you get an AI subtitle job. And I know it's happening here, because it's happened before. And it's happened before and it's been rolled back because people didn't like a different direction when it happened before. And the way it happened before was with Netflix. For a while, most animated things on Netflix were called anime. If they could just scoot by and put a Netflix original anime, they would. And actually, this is so prevalent that my question when I went to the Anime News Network panel, Anime NYC in 2025, and the answer I got was really interesting because I think it was Lindsay Loveridge over there said that of companies, including Netflix, are leaning away from that because fans have just revolted against it. They really don't like it. But the reason why it's bad is more than just they're trying to pull marketing wool over people's eyes. So that is primarily what they're doing. What they're doing unintentionally, though, is they're not honoring where that animation comes from, actually. I mean, a perfect example. There's an old, very good French animated film called The Triplets of Belleville. You can look at that, and that looks and feels a lot like some anime projects. But the second you call that anime, you erase where it originally came from. You erase the fact that it is this incredible French animated thing. Now, assholes will tell you that anime is just a word, and in Japan, everything, any animated show is called anime. From Tom and Jerry to Dragon Ball Z. And they're technically right. But like spirit of the law, not letter of the law thing, the spirit of what was being done there was because Netflix had a marketing interest in using anime as a marketing term instead of using anime as an actual term of art that is definable. They went after it. And that's why a lot of heads like me will get up in arms when people call things like Last Airbender anime. Or people call any number of things like the new Splinter Cell show anime. Or Castlevania anime. Because that's just categorically not true. Splinter Cell shows and were both animated by studios in Texas. And as much as not just localized, it never was truly localized to Japan, it has this vibe and this creative spark to it that is emulated in things like Avatar: The Last Airbender. But in all of those, it feels like that stuff was inspired by anime, not like it stands in the same room as something like Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken, or something like even something like Ghost in the Shell, which is a much more American-style action show. And that's the last time. That was a time when the industry, when industry was in interest in taking advantage of anime fans to make the most money possible, attempted, and everybody would just kind of eventually like, this is bad and you shouldn't do it. To the extent that one of the very first things that the entirety of the press pool, because I was part of the press pool for Anime NYC, did was we all kind of corralled and stuck in a room, most of Anime NYC, to watch the Netflix showcase event for Anime NYC, which featured the Splinter Cell animated show. And it was very clear that that thing was being marketed next to anime, but also things like Blue-Eyed Samurai and all that stuff. And they were like, this is the audience for this. Anime NYC definitely has an audience for these things. And they weren't wrong, but they were pretty careful not to refer to either it or Blue-Eyed Samurai, the Splinter Cell show or Blue-Eyed Samurai, as explicitly anime. Inspired by, absolutely, but not explicit. They weren't saying like, this new Netflix original anime, Splinter Cell, or oh, this new Netflix original anime, Blue-Eyed Samurai, because they knew that would disappoint people. I want to pause here before I want to take you through kind of time departure of Crunchyroll from the fandom, because I think it has something to do with what happened here. When Crunchyroll started, it was sitting out of California, and it was a gray market at best, illegal at worst, for essentially collating and like all the fan subs that happened at the time. Which back in the day, there were fan sub groups that were the plurality of fan sub groups that were doing like good work, and they were very meticulous, and they had really specific ideas about how to subtitle anime, and like. Either went, and people were fans of different groups, like Horrible Subs. I think it's actually still around, or Horrible Subs. And all of these groups were even a little competitive for how they subbed and dubbed shows. And they kind of sure on some level, like, things that, like, weren't the biggest things, they'd try it on for size. And what Crunchyroll did when it came along with it, gave a platform to those groups and to those dubs, and it platformed them, and it built a community around them, so you could go, and I believe there were Crunchyroll forums even at that point. You could go and could hash out in the comments, you could leave reviews, you could follow your favorite shows, and then the cursed flag happened. But everybody kind of Crunchyroll for this because they were trying to go legit and build a thing, and we all understood that a little, in that Crunchyroll got venture capital money. And once it got venture capital money, that site emptied out like no business. I think the very first show they went after that was Naruto. And once that was there, they built it up and up until ultimately it was sold to, and there's a bunch of stuff in the middle there, also sold to Sony. Actually, it was sold to AT&T first, and there was a period of time where you could watch a select amount of Crunchyroll stuff, and I think you still can, on HBO Max, which is very weird. And then they kept going up in popularity, experimented with Crunchyroll originals, lots of them were awful, and then they were in the clutches of Sony, along with Funimation. And there's a great article from a couple years ago, I think, where in Bloomberg, and I'll pin that article in the description so you can go read it if you haven't. I think it's probably like freemium or whatever, but painted a picture of what Crunchyroll probably still mostly looks like, and it was really bad. You know, painted a picture of a company that had changed hands a bunch of times, that was no longer in kind of hands that had made it, and the culture had soured in ways that were not good. Not that the culture of any company souring is good, but you take my point. And then over time they did things like they got rid of the reviews on shows. They got rid of the comment section on shows. And they made all these claims as to why they did it, but what ultimately happened is they reduced the ways that fans could directly reach out to the platform they were watching their content on. They converted it from a place that had community in it to a place that was all about consumption. A la something like Netflix, a la something like Hulu, a la most of the streaming channels, the conversation about those shows is happening somewhere else because they don't allow the conversation to be happening on that platform. The thing that was kind of unique about Crunchyroll is that it really allowed for a lot of conversation about anime to happen on the platform. And once that disappeared, what that meant was there was no immediate direct way where you could go into the comments of a show and be like, you guys really boofed it on this one. This sucks. Never do this again. What do you think you're doing? What's wrong with you? Those kinds of comments in mass would send signals to someone at Crunchyroll. And this is also the time when the Crunchyroll apps were a mess. They are still a mess often. And in that same time frame, and I'll put this in the description as well, there was a episode of the Virgin Decoder podcast with the Virgin's head editor, Nilay Patel, where he went to talk to the current CEO of and Crunchyroll, and the CEO sidestepped the whole app issue, but he entertained the idea of AI-generated subtitles, and that was a full-on foot and mouth moment. It got caught by the internet and people ran with it. I remember hearing it and being like, oh, that's not good. That's bad. You don't say that out loud. Who didn't media train this man to not say that out loud? That's bad. And, of course, Nilay loved it because he loves catching people and stuff like that. But that was another red flag. And on a whole parade of red flags later, here we are. And on the Amazon Prime side, that's a little different because Prime Video started as like a benefit for Prime members, and they came to anime the way a lot of other bigger streaming platforms, bigger than by a magnitude of 100, as like, this is another way we can get more eyeballs on us. And the thing that really hurts about on Prime is they screwed up a lot. You had all kinds of different things. Their player is awful. But they finally seemed to get it together when they, going out and licensing individual shows, they went out and licensed an entire programming block. They licensed the entire Noitamina block as their own. And so for many years now, inevitably they have one show you want to see. And so you end up, more and more shows on Amazon over time. And it's just not. But now it's like all in the wind because, like I said at the beginning, you don't do this with animation. You don't screw with the soundtrack like this. You don't do this not even with animation, but in live action either. Once again, I point you to every single English dub thing on Netflix. They're all awful. And the fact that they thought they could even do this internally is not good. The fact that they thought they could do this internally means somebody thinks that at some point they'll be able to do this for public consumption. And if there was some brave soul who's like, I'm just going to upload this to the main server, go with God, God bless you. But it's bad. And that's not coming from somebody who is an out-and-out AI hater. Believe me, I know all the issues and all the problems, but a big thing that a lot of people will try and convince you of is that you using the tools as provided is unethical. No, it's not. The tools were made unethically. And at some point you're going to have to keep up and use the tools that are there to help keep up. And it's not your fault that they made a collage machine that doesn't attribute people. It's not your fault that every once in a while on Midjourney you see a garbled artist mark in the corner of something you made. In the corner of something that you prompted. It's not. There are versions of this that are ethical and where you could have gone to people and said, okay, I'm going to pay every single artist whose work that we have record of and that we can track down. All the LLMs could have gone to all the authors and said, we want to pay you, we want to make you a new billionaire for the right to your work. And then if they said no, it's not in the corpus. It's not a thing that's accessible. Oh well. But that's not what these companies are interested in. That's not what the people who built them are interested in. They run on two things. It's better ask for forgiveness than permission. And move fast and break things. But what that culture has seeped into is these streaming platforms, all of them at this point, but Crunchyroll and Prime, for the purposes of this, are essentially art dealers, and we go to them multiple times a day and are paying them to deal us art. They fucked with the art. That, no-go. That's not okay. And I've seen tons of people say, like, and part of the reason why I'm making this video is, you should be making noise about this, you should be saying that you don't like this, because if you say it loud enough, people will hear it, and that will give the people in these companies whose paychecks and livelihood depend on them not bucking the system too hard, the ammo to go to the boss and say, like this. We did exactly what you said. Everybody's threatening to leave the platform. Everybody's threatening to cancel the subscription tomorrow. And this is where I'll leave it, because I think this is a good example of this, and also I'm running out of battery on the camcorder. But Disney Plus had a huge existential problem a little while back, and that was that Jimmy Kimmel said something bad about Emperor Trump on his show. And not even bad, just a little bit more truthful than anybody was comfortable with. And he got kicked off air. And he raised hell, and he shit on fire, and did everything sort of setting shit on fire in the parking lot on camera. And everybody and their mother saw this and was like, oh, this is bad. And they made Disney pay by canceling subscriptions, by all these other mechanisms, and eventually Disney listened. And the apology from Amazon is a sign that Amazon was made to listen. because it was a huge deal. It was the first thing I saw Sunday morning. And the only reason why it took me till this long to do it was because I didn't want to break my episode. Like, schedule just for this. I also wanted to internalize it and think about it for, like, the week. But scream about this. Be a pain in the ass. At Amazon with your opinions. If you can find people to go for it. I'm not saying dox anybody. That's insane. But I am saying, like, there be a consequence to this. Because if not, if given an inch, they'll take a mile. On that note, that's where I'm going to leave it. Yeah. Bueno. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you liked the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I'll talk at you later.